So good afternoon, everyone. First, we would like to begin by thanking Manuel Muñiz and his team for having taken the time to conduct this interview with us. We extremely appreciate it.
No, I'm very happy to be here.
We would also like to congratulate you about your new post as chair of the board at the new IE New York College. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you, thank you.
So before delving right into the interview, I would like to begin by giving a short introduction about ourselves. I will go first. My full name is Mariano Eduardo Abad Colino, and I am a Spanish fifth-year dual degree student doing business administration and laws here at IE University, of course.
Good afternoon. My name is Anna Shatalova, and I'm from Ukraine, and I'm currently also a student here at a university studying politics and law, and it's a pleasure to speak with you, Manuel.
Wonderful. Thank you guys for having me.
Of course. And we are here today representing the STORK, which is an online student newspaper, to conduct an interview to Manuel Muñiz, who, as I am sure all of you already know, is the provost at IE University and dean of the IE School of Politics, Economics, and Global Affairs. Manuel has also served as state secretary at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs during 2020, and he is also the Club of Madrid advisor.
Yes, well, that's me, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. So, over to you guys, and I'll be very frank and open as much as I can.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I mean, we are now in the key moment in this world where we have shifting tides. We have tensions in the Middle East. We have the ongoing war in Ukraine, war in Europe since the almost World War II, which is obviously very striking. And it is very clear that with the upcoming American elections as well, the democracy seems to be, at an age of uncertainty and really brought to the test. So it's really, we are here standing in front of the question that can democracy really ensure security and peace also inside the European Union as well as in the world? And you being an advisor to the Club of Madrid and having also so much experience in politics, we wanted to talk to you and ask you about the institutions like Club de Madrid that play a key role in promoting democracy.
Sure.
So what is Club de Madrid? How does it work? And do you think Club de Madrid can also work potentially with different international institutions to achieve its goal, its objectives to promote democracy?
So the club is a very particular, fairly unique institution in that it's a group of members that are brought together by a shared mission and vision. These are former heads of government or state of democratic countries from around the world, and they come together as former political leaders with an ambition to forward the democratic agenda, the human rights agenda, the peace agenda globally. And they sponsor, they lead particular projects and initiatives within the club in order to do this. And the idea is actually quite brilliant, and it's that you have these wonderful individuals that have done all of these incredible things in their political lives, and then how can we make the most of them once they leave? And that's what the club tries to address, and that's the mission of the group. I think this is a very much needed mission and vision in today because of the issues that you raised. We are entering a world that is much more disorderly, volatile than the world definitely since the end of the Cold War in the 90s, arguably since the end of the Second World War, because despite the complexity of the Cold War era and its violence in many ways, there was a structure, a distribution of power and a structure to the international system with the Soviet Union and the US that was actually quite stable at the macro level on non-proliferation, for example, of nuclear weapons, on the use of force, on economic matters. There were these blocks that were very clearly defined. Today, this is not the case. Today, we have disorder across the board. We are moving into a much more multipolar environment, even though there are major actors, China, the US, fundamentally, but many others. So there's a lot more noise, and if you speak to people in the diplomacy and security spaces, they will tell you that this level of uncertainty and volatility in international affairs has not been felt in a very long time, possibly even going all the way back to the 40s, 50s, when the Cold War emerged.
Thank you very much for sharing your insights on a little bit how Club de Madrid works. And we were also wondering what are the main challenges facing the world today in terms of democracy and human rights?
Mm-hmm. So I would, it's a very complicated question to answer well, but I would try to do it at two levels. So I think there are two dimensions here, and they're very interconnected. And you could describe them under the umbrella of a fracturing of the international environment. So we're living globally this process of fracture that I was mentioning. This is a product of a completely new distribution of power globally. So we've seen the rise of emerging powers. Fundamentally, I think the biggest actor here is really China and its rise, and how this shift of power from the West to the East rebalances international power in a way, by the way, that we haven't seen in a very, very, very long time, literally hundreds of years. So China is returning to a position of preeminence that it held for many, many centuries in global history, but which it hadn't held for the last 200 years. So the Chinese economy is becoming one of the largest, if not the largest in the world, depends on how you measure the size of an economy, and many others. Now, this rise of new powers is leading to this fracturing that I mentioned. We're leaving behind the unipolar moment when the US held almost the totality of economic, military, diplomatic power of relevance in the world to a world of multiple actors. Now, unfortunately, some of these actors the underpinning political systems are non-democratic authoritarian regimes, including in China, in Russia, and in many other places. So we're moving to a more illiberal international environment. It's a much more hostile environment to the ideas of democracy, in many ways to the ideas of human rights and others. Now, in parallel, and I'll finish on this, which is the second trend, so you have a fractured and more illiberal international environment. And then in parallel, you have in the democratic world, we have seen over the last few years a weakening of democracies from within. And there's a lot of data on this. I mean, really abundant data on what is now called in the literature, in the academic literature, democratic backsliding, which is the worsening of democracies from within. And I think this is the 17th or 18th year of democratic regression, according to Freedom House and the VDEM Institute. There are a number of institutions that measure the quality of democracy in the world. And this is a product of the rise of polarization and of nationalism within the democratic world, and what these movements are doing to democratic quality inside democracies. So our challenge is twofold. Is one, to strengthen democracies within, and we can have a conversation about how this is done and addressed. And two, for those democracies to defend their system, their way of seeing the world, their core values globally in an international environment where these are much more contested.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, exactly, the weakening, also international legal order, the use of force that you also mentioned previously, I mean, those are things that we thought we have accomplished by setting up the UN Charter, having the second article explicitly saying, you know, no, it's illegal to use force to provoke some things and achieve your ideals, your national interests, and we see the weakening of this international legal order, like democratic backsliding. And then I look at students like me, like Mariano, and more young people who are living amidst this moment of multipolarization, as you mentioned previously as well. And well, I have a very legitimate question. What do you think ordinary citizens like us can do to maybe promote human rights inside our governments, inside our democratic countries, to strengthen democracy instead? What do you think?
Well, so first of all, your depiction of the international environment is, I think, on the whole correct. So again, more volatile, more insecure. I think the security that we've lived since the end of the Cold War to today has been very linked to unipolarity. So I think, you know, the situation on the ground in global politics is a consequence of at least two big forces. One is the international legal order and what it stipulates. But to be quite frank, it's also a consequence of the power structure and the fact that the US was so hegemonic and had the capacity to back that order and to discourage aggression and to have that legal order be fully implemented. So what we're living in many places around the world, I am still to be convinced that is not connected to the US's relative decline and the West's relative decline and its incapacity to implement an order around the world. And it's slightly dystopian, to be quite frank, because as we sit here, we have, of course, a conflict in the Middle East, which nobody seems to be able to rein in. We have the situation in Ukraine with an outright aggression and invasion of a neighboring state. I mean, it's an outright breach of the UN Charter with not sufficient consequences for the breacher, which in this case is quite evidently Russia. So, you know, you have this inability of the system to adjust to this. Now, to your question, and I think this is a consequence of multipolarity, the distribution of power, and the inability to have that legal order be fully implemented and executed. Now, on what can we do? Well, there's a lot of things that one can do, but you asked me about individuals, so I'll mention one thing, and we were discussing this before we started filming this, which is this sense of public service. So I think one of the things that people can do is develop a sense of responsibility and what one can do individually. And by the way, public service does not necessarily mean going into government or running for office. Public service can be done from business, it can be done from NGOs, it can be done from the media. Public service should be understood as the willingness to work for the common interest and for the common good. And this can be done from many, many, many spheres of life. And if we have people like yourselves, young people we have one of the best educated generations in human history. But clearly, I mean, one of the most global, and this is not just here, I mean, it's around the world. So if this generation committed to addressing our common challenges, the security problem, fracturing of the international diplomatic space problem, issues around economics, climate, and many others, I mean, that is an immense, immense asset. Just think of yourselves, but multiply this by millions of young people. And think of this institution here and multiply it by thousands of academic institutions, training incredible people, no, that are really committed and capable. That is a force for shaping international politics that we haven't had in the past, and I think it's a real asset. So I would encourage people to commit and develop this sense of public service and try to address these issues in whatever sphere they work in.
Thank you, Manuel. But what measures would you think that we need to take to try and reduce the gap between high and low incomes to combat social exclusion?
Okay, so your prior question was about what can individuals do, no? And this question
Yes.
is more systemic, no?
It is connected to it, yes. Yeah. Because then also, as you said, multiply this institution by 1,000, multiply it by 1,000, but we have to be also aware that not everyone is as privileged as here who even have a chance to speak with you. So maybe you have a few ideas.
Well, we're all
that
deeply
too.
privileged, and here's a reflection about merit, which is the more we learn about why people achieve the goals they achieve, the more we realize that a lot of that is connected to circumstances in their lives, no? That individuals maybe had very little control over. I'll give you a very important example of this. So we now know, because of early childhood education studies and brain development and many others, that the first 3, maybe 6 years in a child's life is fundamental to their brain development. Okay, so, and one of the factors that really affects this is the complexity of language that you're exposed to in your household. So the level of education of the parents has a huge impact in the brain connectivity, in the physiology of the brain of children. Something as contingent as the household where you're born has a huge impact in how your brain develops in early childhood. So we have an obligation, I think, to provide for mechanisms that correct these inequalities of origin and allow for opportunity for broader sections of the population. But to go back to your broader question, you asked me before, what can individuals do? Well, individuals can commit their assets and their intelligence and their energy to solving these issues. What can societies do? Well, I happen to think that one of the big drivers, if not the biggest driver, of the rise of populism and of nationalism in the democratic world, and hence one of the biggest drivers of democratic backsliding, is our fracturing societies, is the growing inequality within our societies, and the fact that larger and larger numbers of people within our societies feel disconnected from the shared political project. They feel disenfranchised, they feel let down by the system, and this, by the way, shows up in polls of every kind. In societies with higher levels of inequality and social stagnation, you have lower numbers of social trust in institutions. So I think we have an obligation to build more equitable societies, and this is done through education, through taxation, through revamping competition policy. I mean, there's a whole sort of toolkit of measures.
So do you think a civil society participation also plays a role in it? I'm not sure if you've heard about the bowlers problem, which talks about how the civil participation, how civil society has been decreasing in our democratic societies. Do you think that that is true, that is what's happening today, and do you think there's anything that we can do to somehow promote and boost civil society so that they don't feel so disconnected?
Well, I'll give you one example of civil society writ large, where something very significant could be done, which is sort of the private sector. So not all of the solutions to these problems need to come from government. In fact, most of them will probably not come from government. Some of them will, many won't. Now, the way we configure our corporate sector, the way our companies behave towards their employees, towards the communities where they operate, their suppliers, their clients, is going to be a major driver of either addressing this problem or deepening this problem. So, this idea of business for good, business with impact, is so powerful because, business, again, it's hundreds of thousands of corporations operating every day, making decisions every day. If we manage to build a culture of truly responsible business, that would take us a long way. And there are many other ways in which civil society can engage. But the figures that you mentioned and the trends do not surprise me at all, because in a society where big social fracture inequality, I'm not surprised that civil society disengagement is an issue. Because you have greater numbers of people that feel disconnected from the political system. But one way would be through business and business being engaged.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. It was a pleasure, and we certainly do have the opportunities, and we certainly are privileged to sit here, as you said before. And I think that, yes, even the IU University's goal to teach us the entrepreneurship, even when we're learning politics or law or economics, but still have that entrepreneurship mindset, could help us then, promote more businesses with a big impact that could have.
Entrepreneurship is really a mindset. You can be a public entrepreneur, you can be an academic entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs are just go-getters and people that are willing to build stuff that solves problems. So if you apply that across the board, you'll have huge impact. So I really wish you the best of luck, and the rest of our colleagues listening to us. My biggest source of hope for the future is people like you, and that are being trained and that really think about these common challenges and want to go out and fix them. Having just been in government, I tell you, we need more of that. We have many, many more questions than answers. So we need people like you to go out and try to provide these answers. So best of luck, and thank you guys for having me here.
Thank you very much, Manuel.
Thank you.
Cheers.